Hello, everyone.
They're muted.
Okay, I understand that you all are muted. So I just wanted to welcome you to our very first Truth, Racial Healing, and Transformation Learning Community webinar. This is the first time we are attempting this, so please extend us some grace as we figure this out. But we'll be doing a lot more of these. We want to diversify the opportunities to learn and engage. Our first webinar is focused on youth power and adult allyship. And we're going to share the work that we've been doing for the past few years and really invite you to engage more deeply in that work through Truth, Racial Healing, and Transformation. On the webinar, we have facilitating today Jordan X. Evans, who is with One Love Global, and we have Renell Weathers, who is with Michigan League for Public Policy, and she's getting off a plane and coming in on two wheels, so she'll be joining us momentarily.
And who are you?
Oh, you all know my voice. This is Angela Waters Austin with One Love Global. I serve as the place lead for Truth, Racial Healing, and Transformation of Metro Lansing. And I'll be back to share a little bit more with you later in today's webinar.
So before we get started, let's get grounded in what youth organizing can look like and get your energy going for the day. Not earlier this year, but at the end of last year in 2019, we had our MBK Gen, My Brother's Keeper Girls Equity Network Summit in Benton Harbor, where we had over 100 youth come participate, share their voice, and learn with us. And if I can, I'm gonna share a little video about some of the fun that we got to have while we were there. And that video is just a quick little show of the kids having some fun while we were there. We had a couple dance groups, as you could see. This was at, I believe, 9 o'clock in the morning, 9 or 10 o'clock in the morning. And as you can see, kids are hyped, kids are ready, kids have the energy to create change, to have some fun, and show us what youth leading and youth leadership looks like with youth organizing. But I have a few questions for us as we get started. And these are some things to reflect on. And if you can, just take a minute to reflect on this. What does youth organizing look like to you? What does it mean for youth organizing? And what does it mean to be an adult ally? Just take a minute, reflect, and think about some of those things. We'll come back to those in a minute. All right, thanks for reflecting and sharing some thoughts. Again, we will get back to those at the end of the webinar. So let's take a little history and deeper dive into who One Love Global is, our mission, and some of the work that we've been doing. So first, we're gonna start with Truth, Racial Healing, and Transformation of Metro Lansing.
Okay, this is Angela again, and what you are looking at is the theory of action for Truth, Racial Healing, and Transformation. And it flows from left to right, where left is the strategies. The column next to it is the initial outcomes and what we hope to accomplish. And then ultimately, it's the vision of us actually coming together. Beyond the dotted line is beyond the scope of our current work, but ultimately it's where we hope to get to in the long term. So starting with the left, you'll notice that first, we're starting with strategies that will lead to building political power. And this is really targeted towards our most directly impacted communities, people who actually have lived experience being affected by structural racism, so that their experiences, whether they are youth, whether they are immigrants, refugees, whatever their experiences, that they're actually driving the policy and systems change. If you step down, you'll see that we are really focused on really cultivating relationships and supporting the development of allies who can lead in their homes, in their churches, in their places of work, so that they're doing the internal work inside of organizations and in their communities. Stepping down again, we're looking at how organizations can actually do a deep dive, beginning with a self-assessment on where they are in terms of achieving equitable results. And that means examining their staff, examining their policies, examining their programs and services, and really understanding any barriers that could actually be mitigated to achieve better outcomes. Stepping down again is where we're actually building relationships of trust across our team members and across our communities. And that really for us means just doing work together. We learn by doing, and we build trust by showing up for each other in the work. Stepping down again is really what we're focused on tonight. So hopefully you're already registered for our racial healing circles at Lansing Center, but this is an amazing practice created by Dr. Gail Christopher during her tenure at the Kellogg Foundation. And we have an amazing team of practitioners that are really learning to hold these healing circles. And ultimately at the bottom line there is how we build capacity. This is relatively new work for a community-wide initiative, and we're learning the ways that we actually need to get stronger, better, and more effective, and finding the resources to support our continued growth. Ultimately, we believe if we actually do all of these things simultaneously, that we will be moving towards authentic and effective partnerships for racial equity, where we have people from all sectors and all spaces in our community engaged in the process.
Thank you, Angela. And do you want to talk to us a little bit more about some of those pathways to get to racial equity?
Sure. So our approach is, again, simultaneous. We know that we're not going to program our way to racial equity. We can throw money at the problem, but if we're not paying attention to how we cultivate power, where that power is built, where that power is shared, and how that power ultimately shapes policy. So if you think again from the flow from the left to the right, how does power influence policy? How does policy shape how money moves? And that's both in the private sector and the public sector. That determines the kind of programs that are in the community, who they're available to, and ultimately who's accountable for the results. Again, we are developing practice. It's not just a matter of throwing things out there, but really understanding the science and also the evidence based on the actual community. So we also look at practice-based evidence as well as evidence-based practice. And ultimately, what we're really moving towards is a perception change. Are we actually doing the work to change our hearts and minds so that we actually dismantle the false hierarchy of human value?
And Angela, we got a question. What ages do we mean when we say youth?
For the work that we have done, it has primarily been age 12 and over. We think of youth all the way up to age 35. I would say that our primary targets are between age 14 and 25. We do start in middle school, and we have young people that started in our programs in middle school. They're in grad school, they're working, they have families now. So we've learned a lot.
Thank you. And to uplift some more of the youth aspect of the work, in Benton Harbor last year, again, we had over 100 youth participate at the Youth Summit in Benton Harbor. During the day, we participated and shared a People's Assembly model. This model is meant to hear from the community to bring together solutions to those issues, and then to continue working together moving forward. As you see on the right, what we do is we bring together groups to share out their concerns with somebody facilitating. So we get to hear from everybody. On that, you get to see some Post-its. Not all of us are extrovert and want to talk out loud. So we've got Post-its for youth to share out and write on those to also get their voices heard. As we know, it's often one or two people taking up a lot of space. So we want to make sure everyone's being heard in this process. We learned a few things from the youth during this process. From Benton Harbor, we heard that they wanted to stop the war on Black people. And when we say stop the war on Black people, they meant stop violence towards Black youth in schools. They meant that both police violence, they meant security in schools, they meant from their teachers. They also were talking about bullying. That was something I kept hearing as we were in Benton Harbor. There was acknowledgement of the suicide rates for young Black youth being on the rise, and us needing to stop the suicide rates from going up. And especially, they felt hurt that there was a silence around this issue. Sorry about that. And they were also, with the Stop the War on Black People, it was also, we need to end racism, which impacts them both inside of school and outside of. We can create the safe haven inside of the schools, but if they're leaving into unsafe environments, they do not feel safe. And we needed to end that. They also were saying that they need healing spaces and cultural creation spaces. And when they said healing spaces, they meant, again, spaces safe from violence, from police, from bullying, from gangs, from domestic violence. And they needed places to just be. They needed recreational centers, places that weren't being closed, places that were close to them, places that were accessible for them to be. They needed a space for after school to focus on their arts and their interests, to create. So often it sounds like they're going to work or trying to escape violence, that they're not able to create and live freely as youth. They were feeling isolated from their parents and from family who then were also being incarcerated. They wanted to be able to have their family close by. And they thought having cultural creation spaces or healing spaces is one way we could do this to build community. And that's just what we heard from Benton Harbor in 2019. We also heard from youth in 2018, 2017, 2016, and 2015 with our youth summits. We heard that we needed more leadership opportunities. We needed youth to be on school boards and other commissions and committees. Too often we talk about what the youth need, but not actually hear directly from the youth, especially in positions of power. We heard that they wanted to stop opening charter schools without their community input. They wanted to learn, they wanted to be a part of this. Instead, it was people from the outside coming in, telling them what they need and what they want. Again, like those in Benton Harbor, they want to feel safe in their schools. They want to feel welcomed and not like they have to be on defense and worried the whole time. And again, we want youth requests being heard and honored during decision making, not just to come in, sweep in, and tell youth, tell us what you need, and then not having any follow-up. They want to be heard and honored during the decision making. And I think that ties back to being on school boards and being in positions of power. We also had an event last year, part of our Truth, Racial Healing, and Transformation with our law team, where we had a youth dialogue event. We had about 20 youth show up. The youth were from Lansing primarily. And during that conversation, we heard quite a few things, and a few things that really stuck with me. We heard that youth were tired of feeling targeted and labeled a menace to society, that they would cross city lines and feel safe in their own hometown or go into primarily white neighborhoods and not feel safe. They were often supporting their family, but terrified they would be swept in the system and not able to help anymore. They were worried that they wanted police officers that represent them and were culturally competent. Not just officers that look like them and then put them in jails, but officers that understand where they're coming from, the issues that they have, and some of their culture. And they wanted to break the cycle of learning through hard knocks. And when we say hard knocks, it's that we are learning through mistakes, that they're learning through mistakes because their parents or family members are being swept into systems that are imprisoning them. That they go into school and they're not hearing life lessons, only academic lessons. And the teachers don't care about them. So they're not able to ask some of those questions that would help them succeed in life. And one story that really stuck out to me was from a youth who had been incarcerated or went to juvenile facility. And he was telling us how when he went in, or when he got out, his family was gone. He didn't have much support. He was 19 years old. he wound up homeless for a little bit. While he was homeless, he was telling us that he ate and didn't know when his next meal would ever come. So whenever he got food, he ate what he could. And he's bigger now, and he feels like he gets bullied for being bigger, but he wants people to understand that the reason he's bigger is because he doesn't know when his next meal is going to come. Because he's been swept in the system with little support, that this was a time when he got food, he wanted to eat. He needed to eat because he didn't know when that last time would be to eat again. And I think these things really stuck with me because we're hearing it across the communities, that they're not being supported, they're not being held, and they're feeling violence from their teachers, from their schools, from the police, and from the community at large surrounding them. We're hearing this in some of the solutions they've told us, as I mentioned, where they need to be in power so that they can make sure that this stops happening. And Angela, we had some great stuff that came out a few years ago from the Obama administration and from your great line. Do you care to tell us a little bit more about some of these solutions?
Yes, and I'll actually connect the dots with something that we heard from Youth in Lansing. We have a parent organization called NEON, and these are families that are raising young children, and they interviewed youth who were in a residential facility in transition from some kind of placement or incarceration. And what the youth said that they need is love, mentoring, and persistence. They felt like adults give up on them too soon without really understanding how little opportunities they've had and what they've been exposed to. And so we assume that they like things, or they might want to try something, and then it may not be ultimately what they want. And what they want is for us to be persistent and for us to actually be resilient with them as they explore, as they try new things, and to not give up on them. So those lessons have really informed the way that we have moved forward. When President Obama launched the My Brother's Keeper initiative, the mayor of Lansing was actually the second mayor in the country to say yes and take the challenge. Not only did he say yes and take the challenge, but he said, what about girls? We are not going to leave our girls out. So our challenge was to actually create a parallel pathway for girls and young women of color, and we call that the Girls Equity Network. And we've continued to do this work, bringing together leaders from across sectors with a focus on policy and systems transformation. That is now a statewide network where the communities that took the MBK challenge have now embraced girls and are working together for collective action across the state.
And Angela, can you go through some of the MBK and Girls Equity Network milestones?
Absolutely. Milestone 1 is making sure that children are ready to enter school, and I would argue that we should also be focusing on making sure that schools are ready for our children. Milestone 2 is making sure that children can read at level by 3rd grade. For those of you who don't know, our schools stop teaching reading after 3rd grade and make the assumption that you know how to read. So everything is foundational from that point. So if you're falling behind at that point and not reading at level, it is much less likely that you're going to succeed in your studies from that point.
And Angela, with that as well, can I ask you, did you hear anything about how prisons are setting up and looking at 3rd grade reading level to figure out how they start creating more prisons?
Well, just like we look at 3rd grade reading levels to determine interventions, prisons look at 3rd grade reading levels as a predictor on how many prison beds they're actually going to need. And it was said that this was a myth, but I've actually seen the private industry reports out to shareholders where they actually have this information for their shareholders.
Thank you.
Which of course then, so as you can see, you begin to see how problems can scaffold over time. So if you're not reading at third grade, then you're much less likely to graduate ready for a college career and civic engagement. So My Brother's Keeper is making sure that the building blocks are there, that the foundation is there, and the supports that young people need are there as they progress from milestone to milestone. Milestone 4 is making sure that young people have some kind of post-secondary experience, whether it's 2-year, 4-year, whether it's a commitment to national service or military. We want to make sure that young people have stackable credentials that they can then enter into the workforce, which is milestone 5. We want to make sure that young people are prepared for the workforce. And again, we want to make sure that the workforce is prepared for our young people and that they're not creating barriers unnecessarily, to make sure that young people get apprenticeships, that they get on-the-job training, that there's mentoring and support to make sure that they succeed. And then ultimately, milestone 6 addresses where we have failed in those first 5 milestones. When we are not diligent in making sure that we produce the results at the first 5 milestones, young people are much more likely to experience violent crime, to actually have interactions with the courts and law enforcement. And milestone 6 is really about making sure that communities are prepared to give our young people a second chance. No children are throwaway children, and we simply will not allow our systems to treat them as if they are not human and that their lives don't matter. And I'll just share a universal milestone is mentoring. And so that was the undertone and the subtext, and quite frankly, where President Obama, I would say, made his most visible and direct personal connections, is where he became a direct mentor to young men. And so mentoring cuts across all of the milestones. And so one of our challenges is how do we create better relationships between young people and adults so that they're successful at every stage of development.
Thank you. And for everybody that's watching during their lunch and watching along, sorry for the little top bar. I cannot seem to get it to go away. So I just want to read out what this little arrow, what is above this arrow real quickly. It reads Adult Allies for Policy and System Transformation. This image is a quick little simple map of what One Love Global's programs look like and what we do. Angela was just describing MBK and Girls Equity Network, and the milestones. Oh, well, luckily you don't see the toolbar, never mind. As Angela was saying, this is a great program for policy change. This is where we're asking our allies, our adult allies, to get plugged in, to use your power, to step in and to make changes for our communities and your communities. This is where we see you plugging along and where we can make system transformation. Next, we have where youth leadership and organizing is for our youth involved with One Love Global. We have a couple different places. We have Black Lives Matter Lansing and Michigan, where we've done programs such as Election 20XX, and we've partnered with the Movement for Black Lives. And this is a radical organization where youth get to take control of their future, take control of their communities, and be in community with each other. And Angela, I would love to hear more if you could tell us what the Peace and Prosperity Youth Action Movement is. This is a brainchild that I've come to love and admire, and love to hear a little bit more.
Yep, it's definitely my baby and our longest standing program. So before My Brother's Keeper came along, we worked with Ingham County Health Department to create a pilot program where young people learned about social equity and social justice and health equity. And over the past 10 years, we have had young people from middle school and high school learn about servant leadership, learn about organizing, learn about policies and systems. And it's a project-based approach where young people take the lead and they develop the kind of projects and activities that actually help them learn by doing. They have actually worked with a local corner store to bring in fresh produce to make sure that their neighbors have access to healthy foods in the midst of a food desert. They have done service projects with churches and with senior citizens. They created a service project that was focused on their peers in foster care so that they felt loved and supported and welcomed in the community. They have most recently challenged us to support them in diversifying the teaching staff in their schools. One of the things that I love about our youth is their power. And they said, adults, we want to get on a call and we want to actually tell you what our experience is like, and then we demand your support because we're being targeted in school. We have teachers that don't look like us, that don't understand us, and that make us feel unwelcome. And we are concerned that if we raise our voices in school, that we'll become targets, and that will actually make us even more unsafe and even more targeted. So we have been working since that time to really think about how we engage adult allies and show up for our youth in school in ways that they don't always feel comfortable.
Thank you, Angela. And this summer we had an internship with the youth, which was beautiful, and I was a part of. So I, want to thank Angela again for having me be a part of that. Next, we have Renell that's going to give us a policy and budget update and some more thoughts.
Great, thank you. And we, as the Michigan League for Public Policy, has been associated with My Brother's Keepers and Girls Equity Network from the beginning. And so we're excited to continue our relationship with them. And many times connecting policy to what the milestones are is really important. Sometimes we miss that, but if we don't understand policy and how to move it, then we're missing this is how we can change systems to improve our communities and lives of our school systems, of lives of folks and our school system. So I'm gonna mention a couple of things, and there'll be hopefully other opportunities to deeper dive in trainings. But I want to first talk about, we have to understand the budget process. It's really complex, but it's necessary for us to understand it. Many times people, as adults, we forget the civics that we had in school, and now they don't have it. That's be a part of our everyday kind of life and thoughts, because decisions are being made whether we engage or not. So how are we going to engage in those systems? So I want to just mention that the governor will have, our governor, Gretchen Whitmer, will have her State of the State next week on Thursday, the 29th, I believe. And that will be kind of a guide or a little peek into the budget that's going to be released, I think we believe on February 6th. So what is that, how does that impact what the milestones of MBKGN? We have to look at what those fundings are. What is the governor including in that? And that they'll tell us what our fights are, right? So how much funding are they putting in schools? Are they increasing? How are they allocating the funds, right? And so so hopefully we'll get more deeper dive into some of that. I want to mention that process, because in the budget process, even those policy changes that aren't about finances or funding are done in that process. So the system is designed to be opaque, and we have to actually pull the blinds down so we can actually be more aware of things, and therefore we can respond. We can respond to what we don't know. So how we become more aware, and so there'll be several resources that One Love Global and the other partners provide. Hopefully this will all come together and we can take advantage of it. I'll mention a couple of things that are happening in and out of the budget that we need to be aware of. One thing is that last year we had a great win of Raise the Age, and we all took part in that. It took everyone coming together. That really is a model how we actually move things. And it didn't happen overnight. It took about a year and a half to 2 years of this push, right, and pushing these levers and actually coming back and not giving up. As I mentioned earlier, what the students want from us, right? Persistence, being resilient with them, it's about that, right? So Raise the Age, in case you didn't know, now, and it will become in effect, I believe, in 2 years, but 17-year-olds were automatically treated as adults. I don't care if they were littering. If they were arrested, they were arrested as adult, not as youth, and not as juvenile system. Now they will be juveniles. Now that's one step. We have more to go. That's one step that we have, and we have to accept it and actually acknowledge our wins. That's a huge win for us. And then, so to continue that, there are some bills currently that passed the House about criminal record expungement. So those 17-year-olds that were treated as adults all this time, those records follow them, right? And so now there is going to be, if this bill can pass, automatic expungement of records after so many years, and the process will be easier and simpler. So these are bills that are really important, And if you go to mlpp.org, you can get more information about them, or email me. And hopefully my email address will be somewhere available for everybody to have. As Angela knows, we're available to answer questions all the time. So please do that. This is important to pass the House, but now it's sitting in the Senate. What happened before with Raise the Age, it passed the House the session before, but didn't get past the Senate. So it took a second session, and legislative sessions are 2 years. So this is the final year in this session, right? Started January 2019. So we have only until the end of this year to get that through the Senate. That way, start all over again, right? So that happened, Raise the Age, and hopefully we can actually resolve that and not have that similar cycle. I mean, we got to win, but it could have happened faster. You don't want this to happen faster. Other is, which I think people aren't paying attention to, I don't know if people know that if you are in the fast food industry, 16-year-olds or whatever, you have to sign they have you sign a non-compete clause that for 2 years you can't go to another fast food restaurant. And sometimes you aren't getting the hours you need as youth or as adults. This is both. And so there's a bill package, House Bill 4874, that just had hearings on. But it's important that we get this passed as well, because you may be able to have 20 hours in one place, but you go to another business and have 30 hours instead, and you can do more and earn more money to do things that you know that you need to do, that really, especially for those who are going to higher education, wherever level, it will help provide more funding for that. Also, it's more democratic, it's fair, right? And so we want to make sure that we and we understand this for professional, when you have client lists, but for businesses that have minimum wage, usually or just over minimum wage, this really is, we think, wrong policy, and so bad policy. So those are one things that we're fighting for as well. I did want to mention that the census is really important this year. And census, we need to have everyone counted. And we know many of our brothers and sisters, like Latinx community, don't feel safe. That means we have to up our numbers. So those communities that feel safe, we have to up our numbers. And what's also I want to mention, that when the census happens, that funding impacts for 10 years. So youth are 67 years now, their entire K through 12 education will be impacted by this next census. Right. So this is really important that this is for all type of funding, not just school funding, but impacts all areas of community, local community, food access, all the roads, all the title funding, a lot of things come into that. Community grants, community funding. So all kind of things are impacted by funding, impacted by the census. So please join. There's groups in every community that are trying to help educate folks on census. Join them. See what you can do to help educate folks, and talk about it. Talk about it at your friends. Tell your parents, right? Or have children. They have at some schools they have kids coming home and tell Mom and Dad, be counted, right? Fill out the census. So we all can play a role in that. That's really, really, really important. And I want to, there's so many other things that are part of this package. I think this has a lot to do with what the milestones that MPK and GN have. But can't leave out third grade reading. We are, because of the administration that we have now, they're looking at ways to help reduce the retention impact of third grade reading. We want everyone to read by third grade. That's not the question. The questions are what policies and funding are they putting in place in order to make sure kids have better access to resources in order to make sure that happens. So as I think was mentioned earlier, from 0 to 3rd grade, or 0 to 8 years old, you learn to read. After that, you read to learn. And so it's really important that we have that. So we all wanted what policies are in place and how we make sure those policies really move the ball forward and move us forward, rather than putting the hammer and making you less successful in achieving that. There's other things. There's driver's license and state identification. Many of our immigrant brothers and sisters can't get driver's license. And so there's legislation has been introduced in that. That may move very slowly. I want to make sure you know about that. The first thing I mentioned, the expungement, there's bipartisan support of that, so that may be an easier lift. Nothing, as I said, easier. I didn't say easy. I said easier lift. So, but if we all put our hands together, we all have a role to play. We all have various assets, right? I may have connections with some legislators, people influence legislators. Other people may be able to organize people in order to take action, so a lot of things we can do to move the ball. I call it inside outside game, and we have to attack it all fronts for that. I don't know if you have any questions, but I want to share that a little bit with you. It was a lot, but it's a small piece of what the league is working on, and I want to share with you.
Thank you so much. As we heard, what was the website to go to?
MLPP.org.
MLPP.org if you have want to learn a little bit more.
Yeah. There's no questions I have. Any questions?
And we'll get to questions right after this. Yep.
And so I want to talk about right now about what parents can be allies. Is that later? Is that now?
That's next, right?
Yep,
Okay.
yep. We'll be going right into that.
Okay.
I also just want to uplift, thank you for mentioning the census. As you said, get involved with your local areas and organizations that are working on the census. You are in a place where we are working on the census.
Perfect.
So
yes.
Feel free to get involved with One Love Global. We are trying to make sure that our people that are usually not counted, which are usually Black and poorer folks, have a chance to get counted. So look in your mailbox or look for info on April 1st to be completing the census. Make sure you're counted. Make sure that our community gets the resource that we need and should have to take care of ourselves and our youth.
And one thing I'll add to that, one thing people are very surprised about is children under 5 are undercounted, and which is totally odd. No matter what your income is, they're undercounted population. So children under 5 are real people, and they need to be counted. So yeah, I want to make sure I have that.
Exactly. Thank you. Thank you. From the Benton Harbor Summit last year, we also had a breakout session for adults. And during the adults session, we were trying to figure out what does it look like to be an adult ally and how to support our youth. And a few things that we heard from adults and thoughts on how to be the best adult ally. First was listen. There's a lot of talking by us adults. That's what we happen to do quite frequently, but how about we take a step back and listen to what the youth actually need? And as the youth said, not just listen, but honor what is being said. As Angela uplifted, we need to be committed and consistent. We need to be persistent. We need to continue to show up for our youth. As the youth said earlier too, we need to ensure that youth are in city councils, on boards, committees, and commissions in their schools, their city, their county, and state level. We need to make sure to help organize the youth. We need to give spaces and places for the youth to organize. Too often we tell youth to go organize, but where can they do it if we're not opening our doors? And we need to have dedicated and culturally competent Black and brown teachers in schools. Again, it's not just that we need someone that looks like us, but we need someone that looks like us and understands our struggles, understands where we're coming from, and understands how to get us to our next step in life. Angela, you were part of that, and I believe, Renell, were you there as well?
Yes.
Did you hear? Yeah, right there. Would you like to uplift anything else you heard during that?
One, I just want to really thank and acknowledge again Rukia Lumumba, who came from Mississippi. She is the founder of the People's Advocacy Institute that trains folks in actually building out people's assemblies. They are meant to create a system of co-governance where the community is actually in relationship with their local elected officials, and it is a space for community and their elected officials to actually build democracy and to build policy together. And so I'm really grateful that she is bringing that art and science into our community and that she facilitated the adult session. So mainly I just want to really lift her up in her work and her commitment to continuing this process with us in Michigan. And I'll turn it over to Renell because she works with so many amazing people all over the state, including young people.
Yes, and I just want to briefly mention that, and I got a lot out of that session, and I could have stayed there all day listening to and being a part of that grouping, because it was an opportunity to brainstorm and think, and think totally about, truly about how do we support youth. And listening, people like, let's not take it lightly, really listening, not listening to hear what you want to hear, not listening to hear and to change, think about how you switch them and think more like you. Actually listen, because we all know, we're in a space because we know youth know what they need.
Exactly.
And so many times they may not have the connectors to put all pieces together. That's what we can support. We can open doors for our youth, right? We have connections with decision makers, leaders. How do we open those spaces up and giving the people that credibility to hear the voices are, giving the youth that credibility. So many times we can do that. That's something that I want to do this year, is to give youth the opportunities to lift their voices up in those spaces where we have already credibility and that we have our connections. So what influencers, can you open up the doors for our youth at? Many times you sit on boards with folks who influence decision makers. How are we setting those meetings up and allow those opportunities for our youth to be heard? So many things that we can do this year. Also, simply providing transportation. I mean, so many basic stuff we don't think about, right? And sometimes taking them to get a meal before it. So there's so many things that we can do to support our youth. And I think we just have to make sure this year we're focused on that and their needs and listening.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And as I stated at the start, we took a minute to reflect on what it means to be an adult ally. And we're going to turn it over to you. We're going to unmute everybody, and we're going to ask you, what does it mean for you to be an adult ally? And what are ways that you think we can all be adult allies? So if anybody wants to share out. Tom, I'm going to uplift what you just wrote. It's striking to me that we need to think about how to incorporate youth in our congregations, organizing for racial reconciliation. Any thoughts on that? Does that resonate with anybody?
It absolutely resonates. Most congregations in places of faith have youth ministries or special programs for young people. And I think oftentimes we always think about what we can pour into youth, and we build activities for them and we want to keep them busy. I think what we are moving to is how do we actually support young people in identifying the kind of activities that they actually want and actually giving them what they want. One of the things that we continue to hear from young people is that they love to be at our tables, they want to be at our tables, but what they want is their own table. So how do we actually create youth-led, youth-only spaces where they actually have the chance to be themselves and actually come together to think about what they want, and where we take a step back and we support them rather than trying to move them to our agenda. Oftentimes youth organizing, people say youth organizing, but what it really looks like is how do you actually have youth at the table speaking your words and moving your agenda. And what we're saying is that we really want to flip this, where the youth agenda is what is driving the work that we do from day to day. So I would love to collaborate with more congregations to think about what that looks like.
Thank you. And also, one question is, do you know of any workshops for youth to have a better understanding of racism? Or are there racism, anti-racism workshops for youth that you know of?
So Peace and Prosperity Youth Action Movement, it was rooted in racial equity and social justice. And so our curriculum actually includes young people really exploring their identity and all of the ways that the intersections about who they are as people, whether it is race, whether it is gender, whether it is sexual orientation, their gender identity, all of those things make up a whole person. And so that is actually infused in our curriculum. And what we found is that there is really no age that's too young to actually start engaging young people around conversations and understandings of race. Absolutely, it needs to be age appropriate, but I would say dive in. And if there's a way that we can support you and maybe work with you to build a Peace and Prosperity Youth Action Movement chapter within your congregations, that would be something we certainly love to explore.
Thank you.
Actually, I would like to look up another youth element that Renell has really helped us with. In addition to our middle and high school programs, we actually have worked with college students, and we have created partnerships with universities, including Michigan State University, U of M, Wayne State, Western Michigan University, and we created something called a Scholars Program. And so we have students from like James Madison College that helped us create an Election 20XX curriculum, so that moving into this really important election year, that young people actually understand what the electoral process is, that they understand how important and powerful their voices are. And so they created a toolkit for their peers to actually frame this entire process in language that they understand and around the issues that really matter to them. And Renell has provided trainings for our scholars to help them understand policy and advocacy and how they can use their power on campus and off campus. So I just want to lift that up too. There are so many ways that we can engage young people around issues that ultimately impact their lives.
I want to add that as the League, Michigan League for Public Policy, we provide trainings. And we provide trainings on policy through a racial lens, and how those policies, and the policies are not colorblind. And so we also can do some trainings on that as well.
Thank you. And you're unmuted. If there are any questions or thoughts, please share them. I also have the chat up in case there's questions, and if you're like an expert like me, and maybe it's just easier to write it out, feel free to do so, and we will try to respond.
So we've got just a few minutes left. So, and I just again want to just thank you for joining this webinar in celebration of the National Day of Racial Healing. There are hundreds of organizations all over the country that are celebrating this day. I know some of you will see this evening for our racial healing circles, and those who, wherever you are, there's community activities happening all over the country, including in Michigan. So we just look forward to continuing to build this work with you. If you are interested in learning more about being an effective ally to people, particularly around racial equity and working with young people to shape the policies and systems that impact their lives, we would love for you to get involved. You can visit us at oneloveglobal.org. Or more specifically, you can sign up to get involved in Truth, Racial Healing, and Transformation at trhtlansing.org.
And we just got a comment too. KDC mentioned that you model what it means to be allies for youth in your organization and youth symposiums. But it would be helpful to visualize this for those who are not part of My Brother's Keeper or other organizations. Do you have any thoughts or ways that come to mind?
Katie, thank you so much for that question. I think if you're not directly involved in something like My Brother's Keeper, and I would actually encourage you to get involved, I would say that we need everyone at the table. What we are really looking at is how do we as adults actually align with young people and build power together? How do we actually take what we know and understand about systems and help young people better understand how policies and systems work? So it could be after school, it could be presentations in schools, It could be creating a club. We have a young man who's creating a club in his high school in East Lansing. So we're learning from that experience. In your congregation, it could just be forming, it could be a monthly webinar. It could be kind of a dinner and dialogue that you have with young people. I would say get some young people together, ask them what they want, offer the opportunity, really express a commitment to wanting to be with them and to take the journey with them, and actually create the space, just enough of a container for them to be able to tell you what they want, to share their ideas. And then our job is to just simply support them in doing those things. So it doesn't have to be big. And the principles that Adrienne Marie Brown has shared with us, small is all. It could be 3 youth, it could be 5 youth. You want to keep it small enough that you can actually have a deep mentoring relationship. And depending on the young people that you're working with, it could be supports that they need at home, supports that they need in school, in order for them to fully take advantage of the opportunity.
Thank you. And before we close, just want to uplift some of the dates that we had mentioned. So please save the dates and get involved if you can. For TRHT, Truth, Racial Healing, and Transformation, we have an all-teams meeting for community members on February 12th at 5 p.m. That is linked on our Facebook, One Love Global. We also have an event on February 15th, Black the Vote. It is a Black Caucus event for those who identify as Black, to have our voices heard at the national level and to bring our issues into this 2020 presidential campaign or presidential election, sorry. And also, for those that have been with us for the last few years, we've got a new space. And on April 3rd, we are having our grand opening for One Love Global, the Center for Truth, Racial Healing, and Transformation at 12 p.m. We will be sharing more events throughout the day as we figure out what that will look like. But please save these dates. And please check our website out at, what was that, Angela?
That's oneloveglobal.org.
And we had another website from Renell at
mlpp.org.
Thank you, and make sure to check out or to look out for the census information. Make sure you complete your census. Thank you, everybody. Have a great day, and if you are involved with our TRHT efforts, see you tonight.